Good morning. I want to welcome everyone here this morning. I hope everyone's enjoying the beautiful sunshine. We're going to ask Brother Rick if he would to lead us in a word of prayer.
Heavenly Father, thank you for this beautiful day you've given us, this beautiful Lord's Day, first day of the week. Thankful for the opportunity to get together and worship freely as we can do here. Thankful for your word. Thank you, Father, for Brother Scott working and putting this lesson together, bringing it before us, and pray that we can always take a little piece of it with us when we leave and help us in our daily lives. So thankful for your love. And thank you so much for caring for us and watching over us. Father, thank you for the sacrifice of your wonderful Son to give us the opportunity to eternal life. Holy Spirit, Lord, we can do as you have us to do. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Last week, we almost got done with this lesson. And if nothing prevents us, we're going to get done today because we're down in the questions, and we're starting on question 9. You remember this lesson has been about the various institutions and how that began, the name calling and the divisions that occurred because of it. And not that taking care of orphans is wrong. It's certainly a thing that should be done, but we're more concerned about the way that it's being done. Anyone who's been part of a military organization can certainly identify with the fact that you have to respect authority. You have to know that your orders are going to be carried out, and you have to carry out the orders that you're given the way you're supposed to, otherwise chaos is going to erupt. Now, that having been said, let's go on with question 9. What two transfers of responsibility occur when the churches make donations to human institutions to care for the orphans? We may have gotten this one last time, I'm not sure. But basically, an individual is trying to transfer his responsibility to the church, which is not possible. We all have individual responsibilities, and we can't depend upon the church or the preacher or the elder or the deacon or some other member, our husband or wife, to carry those out for us. There are some burdens that you can't share, that only you are given the responsibility for those. The second transfer is whenever these churches who have wrongly accepted this responsibility try to transfer it to an outside institution. The church is not allowed to do those things. Any comments? Okay. I think we beat this dead horse pretty much to death, and so I don't expect a lot of comments on these last couple of questions, but if there are, please speak up. Question 10, what does the all-sufficiency of the churches mean with reference to its benevolent responsibilities? And we covered that pretty well, I think. The church does have benevolent responsibilities, but so do individuals. The all-sufficiency of the church means that it can meet whatever obligations that it has. We've often said that God doesn't expect us to do things he hasn't equipped us for. He's given us everything that we need, and that's the same way with the churches. He's given the churches everything it needs to carry out the orders that he's given it. Any comments or questions on that one?
Some congregations, Scott, have to operate like the lady with only 2 mites.
Yes.
Every congregation has to work within its own means. there are obviously congregations scattered out, probably more smaller ones than larger ones.
Mm-hmm.
And, while the responsibilities, aren't the same, the extent of that responsibility with a dollar sign in front of it, obviously is not gonna be as large for some churches as it is others. And as long as the congregation realizes that its responsibility only extends as far as its ability to carry it out,
Yes.
then a lot of these problems never surface.
Yes, and certainly in this next lesson, we're going to delve into that deeply, but you're correct. You know, what did Jesus say about the widow's mites? She had given more than all the others. And so God doesn't look at the dollar sign. God looks at the heart and the intention. And so, and again, we'll get into this more in the next lesson, but it's important to remember what God's looking at. Okay? Question 11, in what sense are church-supported orphan homes brotherhood institutions? I didn't much like this question. It was kind of difficult for me.
Define brotherhood.
Right. The answer that I came up with is because they're supported by donations from some churches, and in that sense, they feel like that responsibility or that institution belongs to them. And in fact, it does not. We've talked about that at length. A lot of these organizations exist for profit, and they do not belong to the brotherhood. They belong to themselves. And the brotherhood makes a mistake, in my opinion, when they try to support that from the treasury. Individuals, as we've discussed, can help orphans in whatever way they feel is best for them. We can argue over the details, but the church cannot. So, yes, sir.
When we say church, are we talking individual congregation? Because to me, the church is the individual. The individuals are the church, but not necessarily the individual congregation. The individual congregation has a responsibility to do what it do. But we, as citizens of the kingdom, is the church.
That is correct, and that is,
And if individuals want to support these groups, then they do it as individuals,
yes,
not as a local congregation.
right. Most of the time when I'm speaking up here and I say the church, I'm talking about the group that meets here. I'm talking about this local congregation. Very rarely am I speaking about the universal church, because the universal church doesn't have an organization other than Jesus as the head. It doesn't have a mission other than what Jesus gave it, to take the gospel out into the world and to teach. Now, so whenever I'm speaking about the church, I'm talking about the group of individuals who collectively come together, who have decided that they're going to be a congregation, that they put themselves under the oversight of the elders, and that they're going to work together. That is the group I'm talking about most commonly when I say the church. When I say individuals, I am talking about individual Christians, and specifically about individual Christians who are part of this group. And there are things that the individual Christian can do that the church, local church, cannot. Yes.
This term, brotherhood institutions, I think is really much more the language of the institutional brethren.
Yes.
Now, non-institutional brethren, looking at what they believe, use their language too, because they believe they really have done that, but not properly. But anyway, and so and it's the universal church has this obligation, they believe. Now, a local church can establish one of these benevolent brotherhood institutions, say benevolent one, and call upon all the other local churches to support it, because it's a brotherhood obligation or a brotherhood chance to do what the brotherhood should do. Or even individual brethren could get together and form an orphan home or some human institution, and then tell all the churches they have the obligation of supporting it because they believe it's a that kind of thing is a brotherhood obligation.
Yes,
That's where you go wrong at, though, right?
that is wrong, because those people or that congregation that decides to do that is usurping authority over the whole universal church, and that is wrong. Yes, Jim?
Can the word brotherhood even be considered scriptural? And I know the next lesson, we're gonna delve into it more, and it really tries to nail it down. But the fact is, it's like premillennialism, you just can't find it, I'm sorry. Yes, there is a kingdom, and Christ is over it. And that's made up of Christians worldwide over who are under the organizational structure of local congregations.
Yes.
I just have, it's like Brother Williams is saying, that brotherhood idea is something that's put out by liberal congregations in order to support the idea that we've got to all get together and support something, which is falsehood. So if that's falsehood, then I say this whole concept of brotherhood, as they put it out, is falsehood.
Well, I think certainly the concept of brotherhood is in the Bible. Maybe not the word, but the concept is,
But not in the sense.
not in the sense that they've done it.
They're using it.
Right, they're redefining the word. Yes, sir.
Yes, it's only used, brotherhood is used 2 times in the Greek New Testament and in the English versions, 1 Peter 2:17 and 1 Peter 5:9, where he's talking about all brothers or all Christians.
Now, I appreciate your point. I do very much. We should call Bible things by Bible names.
But the brotherhood doesn't have an organization except Christ the head, and they're all brothers.
Actually,
Correct.
but when they use brotherhood, I think what they're saying is a brotherhood of congregations.
Yes,
And that's why I guard against the use of that.
yes. Nonetheless, to talk about it, we sometimes have to use accommodative language. We have to use their words to talk about it.
Well, they use ours.
Well, they use our words.
They hijack those words and turn them into something they were never meant to be. And it is accommodative language in our conversation back and forth. But our brotherhood is Christians,
Yes,
not denominations. And I think, what he's talking about is the denomination just hijacked that word and they spread it over us as well.
and,
Try to bring us into that, and sometimes it works.
well, it does, and unfortunately, there are many congregations that accept
Yes.
what the denominations have defined it as.
Correct.
Okay.
That's the same thing as fellowship.
Fellowship is another word that has been hijacked. And doubtless there are others. Yes, Rick?
I don't mean to pull you off too far, what's known, this is the closest I've ever heard get to it. And I don't mean to interfere in your lesson too much.
No.
But I was wondering, in the denominations, they're part of like associations.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen on the news where they're trying to pull away from these, and they're even taking them to court. Do these associations, like, there's a big association, like a business building up there, do they take all the money and then they decide who gets what, and what's right, and what's wrong, and what they believe, and what they study, and what the class material is?
Pretty much.
That's how that works?
Yes, sir. And then when some people in those local congregations get upset about it, they try to pull away, but they find out that this organization way up high owns all the property, has contracts for the preacher and for everything else. And so it's difficult for them to pull away once they're ensnared in it.
I didn't know a whole lot about that, and I've seen it on the news, like, and I've wondered about that before, you know, that they're telling everything to do.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yes, Jim.
But the irony of it is that, and you see this most prominently here lately with the Methodists,
Mm-hmm.
they're trying to pull away from the United organization. And they're basically told, or the way they're looking at it is, we've gotta go, if we're not gonna be part of the United organization or association, we've gotta be part of the global, which is the more traditional, as they call it,
Mm-hmm.
in that it condemns homosexuality. So, it's just ironic to me, you're leaving one association and you've got to join another, and who knows where that will take you. So,
In their specific case, they're not willing to give up being Methodist.
That's the nature, though, of denominationalism.
Yes.
That's the whole reason for their existence, is because they pull away, and it never stops.
Mm-hmm.
As long as they exist on this earth, someone within those organizations is pulling away. They're continually moving because they don't base what they do and what they believe on this book.
Mhm.
And so that's the process, that's why we have so many denominations.
Yes.
You can't, it never stays the same, it continually changes, they make up rules as they go.
Okay.
which is exactly why we have to guard against things today.
Correct.
And why we have to study things like this, because everything you just said, I can see a correlation with why do we have liberal congregations
Yes.
of the churches of Christ today.
Pulling away, that you're right.
It's because we want to be like the nations around us. So, Mr. Williams?
If one particular Methodist church wanted to withdraw, and they're told they can't do that, or they've got to pay a big amount of money, it wouldn't mean anything in practice if they didn't get the courts or the government to enforce those obligations.
Correct.
The government should not be in the business of having much of anything to do with religion.
I agree.
And so in that case, no matter how much they're told that they have to do this, they can just walk out and if they want to join another association, they can do that voluntarily.
Mm-hmm. Now, they may not be able to take the building with them.
It's just like when they tell each individual member how much he has to give that year or else, well, again, you know.
Okay.
If you don't, now you can appeal to a person's conscience, but if he doesn't feel conscience stricken in this matter, the only thing they can do is use government to do it, and if government won't do that, then people can give as much or as little as they want to.
Well,
They could be kicked out of that church, but again, those are all matters of morality or obligation or whatever.
Yes.
Individual, in relationship to the group.
Well, certain denominations or groups or whatever you want to call them, like the Mormon Church or the Christian or the Scientology, they use peer pressure very effectively to keep their members in line. And that, in some ways, is stronger than appealing to the government. So, and it's very dangerous.
Well, with the Mormons, of course, you know, they have a tremendous amount of money, and all Mormons, you know, good Mormons, will be taken care of, you know, in their senior period, et cetera, and I mean pretty well for that matter, but if they leave, they lose all that.
Yes.
So again, it depends upon how important, you know, laying up treasures for yourself on earth are to a person.
Mm-hmm. It's pretty important whenever you're looking at an empty cupboard.
And especially if the government stops paying, cancels the Social Security system, it would mean a lot more to be a Mormon in a case like that.
Yes. But we are drifting apart, so let's get back to the next question. What are some things that an individual can do the church is not authorized to do? Church is already married, yeah. Huh?
Help all the needy, especially those with Christian faith.
Yeah. They can also own a business. Church is not supposed to own a business.
You can do anything, but church can't do.
We can also earn money where the church is
Is by donation only.
dependent on contributions.
Yes. We can be politically active, but as we were discussing with the law, and the government should stay out of religion, so the church should not be, and again, I'm using the church as the local congregation here, collectively, we don't endorse a candidate, we don't support anything, but as individuals, we must support the candidate that we think is most qualified. We must vote for the resolutions that matter to the church or matter to Christians that are moral. So we have to do those things. But individuals can also donate to the Red Cross or to the American Cancer Society, the March of Dimes. You know, they can donate to me if they want to, but I don't count on it. So, question 13, why is the church not authorized to support colleges? Oh, excuse me, yes, sir.
In Titus 3:1, Paul tells Titus, put them in mind to be subject to principalities and powers. He's talking now about, human authorities over Christians.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, to obey magistrates, to be ready to every good work, the individual Christian.
Mm-hmm.
Is obligated from the teaching of the scriptures. If people in society or government wants us to do something that is really good, we ought to engage in that.
You ought to support it.
But the church is not.
Correct. Okay. So this question, why is the church not authorized to support colleges?
Secular education was not our mission.
That's not what we're supposed to be teaching, is it? We're not teaching engineering or political science or music or anything else that colleges teach.
Of course, they put a mandatory Bible class in most of those colleges, and I think that probably helps them,
It may soothe their conscience a little bit.
convince people. I went to Harding, and, other people in here went to Harding as well.
Mhm.
And of course, there were rules that were moral rules back then. That was in 1967, but you had a mandatory Bible class, and you had, there was assemblies of just singing.
You had to go to chapel every day.
Chapel every day, and I learned a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I also learned a lot about how they were supported. So,
Yes.
there were things that we were taught, as I just said, that were secular education, and that's not part of the mission of the church.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else?
It's been attempted a lot of times since the turn of the last century for sure, for the church, various congregations, to start colleges, schools, higher institutions of higher learning, and sponsor it, and keep it as a Christian school.
Mhm.
That was their ideal. It has never, ever lasted beyond one generation, because by the time you have to have boards of directors and the government has to get involved in it. The church cannot control those institutions. Even if you wanted to, it's not possible. They pull away, just like we've been talking about.
Mhm. And the church is not supposed to control those institutions.
It was a good idea, they thought,
It is a good idea.
every time, but it is not the church's business to do that.
Mm-hmm.
They have no right to do that.
Correct.
And expect it to be modeled after the church. It's not possible.
Well, I don't know a lot about Florida College. I know Mr. Williams does, but I understand that they do not accept donations from the church. And the people who started Florida College did not start it as a brotherhood work. It was started as a group of men who said, let's start a college where these things can,
Yeah,
So-
that's one of many, many schools.
yes,
But, I mean, there are good schools, and some that are better than others, but they're not, a church cannot,
they're not the church.
or they're not the church, they cannot call it a Christian school.
Yes, Mr. Williams.
When Florida College became, I think, a junior college, so to speak, with maybe a couple of extra years for Bible teaching for just ones who wanted that, it was the only junior college in the whole state of Florida. So it got a lot of, non-Christians going to it, et cetera. And of course, especially when the college almost went under, collapsed financially, a number of northeastern non-Christians began to come there. So that for a while, only 50% of the students were Christians. So when churches were contributing, they were contributing to a lot of
To the education of a lot of other people.
all want to be contributing to, but it was amazing how many of those persons became Christians.
Yes.
One guy
And
came down with just a friend who was coming, who was a Christian, and they were having a devotion, so he brought his guitar up there, and he found out that they didn't do things like that,
Yeah.
and he found out a lot of other things, but eventually he became a Christian and a preacher himself and married one of the youngest female teachers on the faculty.
Okay.
But that didn't always happen, and all this thing also about controlling what students do at night and when they have to go to bed and all that kind of stuff. The college does that, but the church is not involved in things like that.
right. What is that proverb? Evil companions corrupt good morals. Well, if you have good companions, they help support your morals and help you develop better ones. So again, it's peer pressure a lot. Okay. Question 14, why can't the church financially support colleges to teach the Bible? That's the main one. It's not authorized. It's a task given to the church, not to somebody else. The church can't delegate it. And what concept of the work of the church do brethren who call for church support of colleges and orphan homes? Again, this is what Brother Jim was telling us earlier. They have the idea that the church universal is made up of a group of local congregations, which is not true. Well, we finally got through this lesson. Any comments or questions before we get into the next one, which is going to be, I do? Well, I don't have my book with me, and I missed those. Someone want to read the question, and we'll just band it out? Well, it was number 16. I missed that one.
It's also about all sufficiency of the church, so I think we've probably done that long enough.
Okay. Well,
And 17 is about brotherhood institutions operated by non-institutional brethren like Florida College and Guardian of Truth Foundation.
okay,
Those are just individual enterprises, and so they do not ask the church to support them. Now, an individual member there may be supported by the church for some reason, because he preaches or whatever, but the churches do not support either organization.
okay,
And in number 18, with all of these cases here, like Power and Light, Hospital, and so, we may buy a service, the church may buy a service from those human organizations, because the church itself cannot do what the organization does
Mm-hmm.
for people. But it does not contribute, it does not organize those and doesn't contribute to them, but individual members may do it.
Well, an example of that would be the construction of this building. Members here can't do it. And so we contracted with someone else to do it. So,
And you can't print Bibles either.
I can't print Bibles.
You can't translate, the church cannot translate individual local. Well, there might be a particular individual local church, especially near a Christian college, so to speak, who has the Greek scholars and Hebrew scholars to do that. But it can't be a thing that local churches that generally are capable of doing.
Right. Okay. Well, I'm sorry I missed those questions. I apologize for that. But we're going to go on to the sponsoring church, and again, I'm glad that lesson's over with. So it's taken a while. Unfortunately for me, this one is going to be more of the same, but with an emphasis on the sponsoring church. So, what is a sponsoring church? Huh?
Be like a head church.
Yeah, that's one way to think of it.
That's the congregation to which all other congregations send their money.
Yeah, well,
Like turn the responsibility over to that church.
It's like Abilene.
Abilene,
Abilene, it's Jerusalem on the plains, you know, is what they call Abilene Christian College and Abilene, Jerusalem on the plains.
okay. Yes, sir?
It's a church which is going to sponsor, so it volunteers to sponsor a particularly good work, they say.
Mm-hmm.
Whether in benevolence or in evangelism or whatever, but they're not capable of doing it themselves. They're just sponsoring it for the brotherhood. Then they call upon other local churches to give them the money so they can do it.
Yeah. And I don't know if anyone has this thought, or anyone else has this thought that I've had, but you drive through places like Burger King or some of these other places, and they say, do you want to round up and help support scholarship funds? Sounds good. But whenever they report it, they don't report it as me giving them money. They report them as Burger King gave them the money. And so I don't like that. So I say no. And that happens all the time around here. A lot of people have their hand out wanting something. And
That's kind of deceitful, isn't it?
it's kind of what?
Deceitful,
It's very deceitful.
because like, they're being generous with other people's money.
Yeah. And that's the same thing that happens with the sponsoring church arrangement.
They want a good reputation for being charitable or whatever, but they want other people to give them the money to do it.
Mm-hmm. So, okay. I don't know if y'all used to watch the Jerry Lewis muscular dystrophy telethons that used to come on. And, you know, they'd have these big groups come in and, you know, Firemen Association for one. Look at this money. We've collected $10 million for you. Well, they were out on the corner taking my money to do it. They didn't give the money themselves. And that's just more of what we're talking about. So,
Often they got paid to do that, but they didn't give any of their own money.
right. And it's the same way with these telemarketers that call you up and ask you for money. You know, how much have you given? Well, put that down for me. You know? The elders of that sponsoring church agree to oversee a work. And certainly elders can, you know, oversee works at the local congregation, and they guarantee the expense. And they say, we're going to provide funding for this. Then they turn around and say, okay, everybody contribute. And, you know, it's deceitful. That's a good word for it. In this arrangement, the local church eldership assumes a work which it alone is not able to do. and basically subjugate these other congregations to them when they give them the money. They're taking away their control over their own treasury. So, this was a little comic that I found, kind of illustrates it. You know, not only did your checks bounce, but they bounced into other people's checks, so. What happened? Oh, have I not been, I am sorry. Y'all, somebody should have said something before this. Well, that's not the one. This one. Not only did your checks bounce, but they bounced into other people's checks. Huh? Okay. So that one, and then this one was another one, and this one was humorous, not exactly on, but it was humorous. Said banks need to get better at restocking their ATMs at Christmas. I've been to 5 different ones, and they said they had insufficient funds. So, you know. Yes.
You always feel guilty, you walk past them, and you don't want to give a little bit of coins, or teach your children to, give a little bit of coins, just to, that's like the first thing you kind of teach the kids to do, then you feel guilty for doing or not doing it,
What Salvation Army doesn't tell you is that they are a separate denomination. And so whenever you're giving money to another denomination, what are you doing? You're wishing them Godspeed, aren't you? So we can't do that. And that also caused a lot of controversy with these mandatory giving that a lot of the corporations do. They take money out of your check to give to these people. Salvation Army had their hand out too, and that causes a problem. And so the sponsoring church, this is a graphic that kind of shows what it is. You have the contributing churches, the sponsoring church, and then they're doing a work. And in the early part of this century, the church at Henderson, Tennessee, began such a work. And they said, we're going to preach to everybody in this area. And so they sent to western Tennessee and Kentucky, northern Mississippi, northeast Arkansas, and southeastern Missouri. And so they sent out preachers, and then they said, we'll take over. We'll direct them what to do. We'll find the men to do it. But y'all give us the money. Excuse me?
It's always all about money.
Well, you follow the money trail, and you usually find what's at the root of it. At the time, this didn't go over very well with David Lipscomb, who was still the editor of the Gospel Advocate, and he opened fire on them. He said, this is just another missionary society in disguise, which it is. And so under that, they said, okay, we're not going to fight. And they kind of gave up for a while. But then World War II happened. And they said, we need to go teach these poor people in Europe. And this is the same thing we talked about before. We need to establish orphan homes in Europe. We need to go do all these other things to help them physically and spiritually. And no doubt these people needed help. I'm not against helping these people. But it wasn't for the church to do it. It wasn't for a sponsoring church to decide to do it. But again, you have people who think they're being benevolent, start doing it. They wanted to send them preachers and evangelists. But because no one church was able to send preachers everywhere, they said, well, let's figure out a way to do it, and that's how the sponsoring church developed. And if you remember this guy, G.C. Brewer, he's the one who first wanted churches to support the colleges at Abilene Christian. And so it was his bright idea to be a sponsoring church as well. and you may not can see that second picture very well, but he said, we're going to be responsible for evangelizing Germany. And we're going to take money from these local churches, we're going to funnel it through us, and we're going to see to the work.
Yeah, and one of the really big conflicts there was that those brethren, in Italy and Germany answered to the elders in the United States.
Yes.
They didn't answer to anybody within their own congregation. Any work that was done had to be approved by the church, in the United States.
And it wasn't that,
One of the congregations in Memphis, I don't remember which one. Either
It was this one.
Italy or Union Avenue, good, then, okay, you got Japan. I'm good with that. That's who those brethren answered to.
and then the one in Brownsville did the one in Italy. So, but as you were pointing out, they weren't answering to the Christians locally where the preachers were at, nor were they answering to the people who gave the money. So the people who gave the money had no control over what their money was being used for. The people who were in the local congregations where these preachers were had no control. And so it was not a situation that you find in Scripture. And so by the end of 1945, there were lots of churches that were jumping on board, say, we're going to be somebody, we're going to oversee works, and we're going to do that. Particularly the hiring and firing of preachers. Created several church levels, like we've talked about. And again, this picture, the local churches, the sponsoring church, and the missionary church. And this is an arrangement you do not find in the Bible. And they said, boy, this is working really well overseas. Let's start doing it here. Yes, sir.
And so often, the mission church never grows up
Oh,
to
no.
be an independent church. For example, in Ethiopia, I think back in the 1960s or so, some institutional brethren went over there and I forget what big church here in America. And it was over this whole thing. And then it kept sending money, but it stopped sending anybody to help them to preach and edify them, etc. And these brethren were just all left by themselves, etc. And so finally, when non-institutional brethren began to go over there in the 1990s, boy, they were just so glad to see Americans caring about them again and coming to teach them and help them understand the Bible more and exercising no authority over them whatsoever, etc. And they thought, man, we like this, and we like the fact that you care for us and you're helping us understand the Bible. And so they got weaned away from just being a permanent mission church controlled by a big American church.
Mm-hmm. Throwing money at the problem is not always the solution. Sometimes money is needed, but that's rarely the solution, and certainly not in that case. More money wasn't going to help.
And in the case of Ethiopia, the government wouldn't let, maybe any church be established in Ethiopia if they didn't also engage in a socially approved work.
Yep.
And what it was usually a school.
Yes.
A real school for educating the children in Ethiopia. So if you created, and this particular mission church had its school there too, right along all the time. Otherwise, this was especially the Marxist communist government back at that time.
So basically, they were hijacking the church to do their work.
That's right.
Okay.
And Americans were paying for that.
Well, at first, everybody was excited. Well, we'll get through this lesson maybe in a couple of weeks. next week is the start of our meeting, so everyone come for that, but we'll get back to this soon. Thank you.